We'll convene meeting. Could we all rise for our Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Public comments. Is there any members of the public who wish to address this authority regarding any item that's not listed on the agenda? Seeing no one step up, we will move on. Need approval of minutes.
Move approval.
I have a first.
Second.
I have a second. We'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous? Well, I better come back. Any nays? Unanimous. All right, moving on to consent calendar.
Move approval.
I would second that, and just a minor change in A2.6, last sentence. It mentions auditor instead of agreement, instead of a financial advisor. It's just a typo in the report. We missed it.
So,
To A6.
A6. Yeah. Yeah. It's an agreement to renew our financial advisors, and then it says we recommend that we approve the auditor's contract. So.
Okay, before, I do have a first and I do have a second, but we also have a request for Speaker Delta Peddlers. Bruce? On 2A9 on the consent calendar.
2A9 on the consent calendar. Bruce Olson speaking for the Delta Peddlers Bicycle Club and for all bicyclists in East Contra Costa County. I'd like to speak about the Bollinger Canyon Iron Horse Trail bicycle and pedestrian overcrossing. As you know, if you've explored the area, Bollinger Canyon Road is wide, wide, wide. Putting this bridge in reduces the amount of time we have to keep the green light for the cross traffic so that the pedestrian can make it all the way across the street in a reasonable pace. So that increases the level of service for the motorist. Statewide, we are trying to go to a metric that decreases vehicle miles traveled. So the reality of building this bridge is we're working at cross purposes with ourselves. But also, this bridge makes it safer for the bicyclist. So as long as the motorists are paying for this bridge, go for it. Thank you.
All right, I have no other speaker cards. And we do have a first and we do have a second. We'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Unanimous. We now move into major discussion items. We have a new item, federal legislative update. Jason Tai with Ginsberg and Associates is here tonight from Washington, D.C. There are lobbyists, Jason Tai and Maddie Pike. And I've been with them twice now in Washington, D.C., and they are great lobbyists in the sense of they have the feel and the tempo of Washington to the best of their ability, if anybody can get that tempo. But I just want to let the board know and the audience know that I was extremely pleased with our last going around to the various offices within the Senator and Assembly. We were greeted very, very nicely. Everywhere we went, the schedule was on time, it was accurate, and they really did a good job prefacing. And I did wear a very bright coat, as per usual, and it caught the right amount of attention. In fact, I'll relate this story. We got to Jason, and I was at we were in the quarters of Congress, and somebody said, I knew Mayor Taylor was in town. And how in the world do you know that? I saw him on the steps with his coat. So CCTA is getting the knowledge and the visibility. With that, thank you very much for coming, and welcome.
Thank you, Chair. What are you going to wear on your next visit? Thanks so very much for that warm introduction, Mr. Chair. A lot of these things simply could not happen without the board leadership and the vision that you all provide in helping make this happen. So I think these successes really point to this agency. Good evening, Chair Taylor, Vice Chair Pierce, and commissioners of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. Still morning, because I flew this morning, to give a federal update and speak to some of the successes that this agency has had in Washington. First, I got to say, it's always such a pleasure and joy to be here in Contra Costa County. It's a beautiful place. The dry heat is phenomenal compared to the wet heat we'd have in Washington. So, as Mr. Secretary Iwasaki always says, I can't deal with this humidity. And frankly, you know, in this county, you have really what is best-in-class transportation system. But this could not happen without the amazing leadership that you all have, and that's the amazing leadership led by a really fantastic and, dare I say, somewhat charismatic CEOs, Randy Iwasaki, and also surrounded by a phenomenal CCTA team that work day in and day out in trying to make this county even better through innovation and plain old hard work. Let me take a brief moment in particular to give a quick shout out to someone who has to put up with me on a regular basis, and that is your wonderful Director of External Affairs, Lindsay Willis. Does a fantastic job. GR is a very critical thing, as you all know as elected officials. It's something that you have to do, and it's hurry up and wait. It's visibility. It's the optics, for good or for bad. But it's sometimes, and oftentimes, if you put the right pieces together, it means success. But let me also kind of reiterate one very, very important thing is that we represent many different public agencies across this country. Success cannot happen without a board that understands vision and that allows a team to run and gun and innovate to try to make things happen. And I think that's really kind of a crucial part of this is the governance structure, and you all do a wonderful job. Since we started working for CCTA a few years ago, we've been so lucky to have developed a wonderful relationship with the CCTA team. In fact, I believe, and I believe we believe, is that we view ourselves as part of the team. We are your boots on the ground in Washington. We are your eyes and ears in Washington. This fantastic teamwork is predicated on some key fundamentals, as most things: shared values, shared work ethic, and a common goal to get the good things done. But we really just kind of enjoy working with one another. But as often as it becomes a somewhat overutilized term, synergies really do happen. And so a few examples to help illustrate that point. Just early this year, this team helped put together a proposal and drove a proposal and advocated for a proposal that resulted in an $8 million grant from USDOT to help fund the Mobility on Demand, or MOS, program. That was not done overnight, as you all well know. It required many, many visits to Washington, many engagements, but also it stemmed from, and I think Randy would testify to that, his work with the previous delegation for the 2015 FAST Act to create this grant program. And so it took about 5 years worth of work to get to where we got in 2019. So I think that also speaks to the issue of takes time, it's hurry up and wait. As you know, nothing in Washington happens quickly. In fact, some would say very, very slowly. Out of 51 applications requesting over $265 million, only 10 recipients were selected. CCTA won one of the largest grants, and it was the only non-state DOT, and I'm not counting University of Alabama, to win this award. So that really is testament to how much work it takes that goes into pushing for this and advocating for this, putting together a very sound technical proposal, and making things happen. And just last year, 2018, in the FY 2019 appropriations bill, thanks to the efforts of Congressman DeSaulnier and Speaker Pelosi, Congress created a brand new $60 million automated driving system demonstration grant program. That took 2 years worth of work. It took a lot of effort. It took going to the well constantly, showing them what this fund could be utilized for. and then shooting for it. One thing that is also very on top of mind is the continuing efforts with NHTSA, with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Secretary's Office at USDOT. Director Iwasaki and Ms. Willis worked with all of us to secure permission from NHTSA on a daily basis for the shared autonomous shuttle bus on public roads in California, in San Ramon. And those are the types of things that take constant, reinvigorated effort, forward-facing with the administration, with the career folks, with the politicals, but as well as with the U.S. Congress. And while I wish I could say there was some sort of secret sauce to this success, there really isn't. It's just hard work based upon utilizing kind of the local delegation here. And I wouldn't be remiss if I didn't mention how amazing this delegation has been to work with. In particular, the fellow who has the district office right across the street, Congressman DeSaulnier. He has been really, as a member of the House Transportation Committee for this region, he's been instrumental in carrying so much water for this agency and for many, many other efforts. And it really deserves a significant shout out for that. And then also Speaker Pelosi, herself and her office have been critical in many of the things that we've outlined, including the constant engagement with USDOT at the highest levels to ensure CCTA's interests are being met in a forthright fashion. But that also goes beyond that. I mean, you have the local delegation, and the other element that takes constant engagement, and I think Mr. Iwasaki has been out to Washington many times, and that is engagement with the other stakeholders, the folks who play a significant role in determining how transportation funds are allocated, how transportation funds are programmed, and how transportation policies are written and or rewritten. A few of those key folks include Chairman DeFazio of the House Transportation Committee. He is a congressman from Oregon who recently took over. Randy was a key component in doing some site visits with Mr. DeSaulnier and Chairman DeFazio when they came to visit last year or perhaps a year and a half ago. To this day, Chairman DeFazio in Washington says, man, that Randy Iwasaki really knows how to give a tour. But to show how innovation and what innovation actually means as opposed to some of these high-minded ideas that people often talk about in Washington, but don't really get to see and touch as you do here in CCTA in Contra Costa County. Another fella who's been very instrumental in the past used to be the chair of the Highway Subcommittee, Transit Subcommittee in the House, and now is a top Republican on the Transportation Committee, Congressman Sam Graves. I think maybe about a year ago, probably the week before, they were doing a roundtable at the subcommittee on highways and transit that oversees all the programs that we care about and that funds many programs and projects across this region and state. He was like, yeah, you know, I want to have Randy Iwasaki come out and speak on this issue. The week before, and it was the week before the third Wednesday where we have a board meeting. So that morning, you got there Tuesday night. Wednesday morning, we had the roundtable at 10 a.m. Eastern. Hightailed it out to Dulles. Got on the 12 o'clock, I don't even remember what time it was, a 1 o'clock flight, got to SFO, and our Uber driver was going very, very slow to Dulles. We're like, we're going to be late to our flight. This guy's going 45 miles per hour. He was like, yeah, I know. I'm going 45. We get to SFO, take Bart out here, and we get to the board meeting was an hour ahead of time. But that was a key element. You had many members on that subcommittee who were there listening to about all the great things you do in Contra Costa County. So I think those things are critical. I think, as the chair mentioned, and I think Commissioner Hudson has been out there, we try to keep a very, very aggressive schedule and to try to maximize everyone's time because there's so many different stakeholders, well, frankly, at stake. And so we meet with members of the delegation, the chairs of the various congressional committees, appropriations, various advocacy of trade associations, the agency heads. And so these are the things that we try to do on a day-in, day-out basis. And so if there are any meetings that board members would like to have in Washington, feel free to go through Lindsay or Randy, and we would be, as your eyes and ears and your boots on the ground, be happy to facilitate those meetings on your behalf. So with that, to kind of set a little bit of the context, I'd like to turn it over to the brains of our entire operation, Ms. Pike, to kind of speak to what is going on in Washington how do some of these positions that CCTA is pushing will time in with the once every 6 year, $305 billion FAST Act reauthorization. So with that, Ms. Pike.
Thanks, Jason. So as Jason just mentioned, I think one of the biggest things on Congress's agenda in terms of transportation is the reauthorization of the FAST Act, which is the 6-year, $305 billion transportation bill. This bill expires at the end of fiscal year 2020, and it was actually quite remarkable that the FAST Act was a 6-year bill in and of itself, because previous transportation authorization bills have been much, much shorter than that. So this major piece of legislation authorizes the funding and the policies for pretty much all U.S. DOT programs, including Federal Transit Administration, Federal Highways, FRA, NHTSA, all of that. So this is the big opportunity for CCTA to get their priorities included in the next reauthorization. I know that some of CCTA's priorities for this include regulatory reform, which is something that can definitely be pushed through the reauth. Protecting the pre-tax parity between parking and transit is going to be huge. The tax bill that was passed last year actually took a hit to that program, so it's going to be vital that we continue to protect that parity. This bill will also include opportunities to increase funding for transit in general, freight, research, intelligent transportation systems. These are all in play, so this is really the time to shine. The next item that I want to bring up is the appropriations process. Right now, Congress is considering appropriations bills, the spending bills that control how much Congress can spend. So the House is taking up they're condensing, or they're combining some of these appropriations bills into minibuses. So these minibuses include spending for 4 or 5 different agencies. So the House already passed its transportation spending, and it actually includes $86.6 billion for U.S. DOT, which is much higher than the 2019 enacted levels. Of interest to CCTA, it also includes $10 million for the establishment of a highly automated system safety center of excellence. This would allow U.S. DOT personnel to review, validate, and certify the safety of automated technologies. It also includes $48.9 billion for the Federal Highway Administration, which is higher than previous spending bills. It also includes $13.5 billion for the Federal Transit Administration and $1 billion for the National Infrastructure Investments Program, which is what used to be called TIGER and now is called the Build Grant Program. So this has all been happening in the Democratic-controlled House, but the Senate Committee on Appropriations chairman has indicated that he doesn't want to start the appropriations process until the overall budget caps have been established between the House, the Senate, and the administration. Additionally, the administration has said that they oppose the House-passed transportation spending bill because of similar reasons that the Senate hasn't taken up an appropriation spending bill. But the House and Senate will continue to work on this. Another item that I think is relevant to CCTA is autonomous vehicle legislation. So in the last Congress, the House and Senate attempted to pass an AV bill, which basically would pave the way for coming up with a framework of how to regulate autonomous vehicles nationally. It would loosen up federal regulations pertaining to self-driving vehicles. and basically allow more to operate on roads. There are a couple other things that it would do, but unfortunately, last Congress, the House and Senate Republicans and Democrats couldn't come to an agreement. So we are hopeful that Congress will take this up again this Congress, but there are some challenges. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here. We really love coming here. I love coming here. I love this board. I love every time you guys come out. We have a lot of fun, and I think we do some good work. So just to reiterate, I think the FAST Act reauthorization is going to be our biggest legislative, or should be one of the biggest legislative priorities for this next couple years. So happy to take any questions from anyone.
Questions?
You just said it's going to be the biggest thing for the next couple of years, but it runs out. What, or did I miss something, runs out fiscal year 2020?
No, you're right. You're correct. I guess a couple of years was the wrong thing to say.
So they're working on an extension or a new one? Is that the...
So right now, I would say they're working on a bill, a reauthorization. It's unclear whether or not an extension will be necessary. However, I can say that both the House and Senate committees that oversee the reauthorization process are holding hearings. They're taking stakeholder input, and they are trying to write legislation so that this can be a multi-year reauthorization bill instead of a short-term extension.
Well, last part of the question then, can we expect to know, when I see fiscal year, I'm still trying to figure out, everybody seems to have a different, I count it as July 1st starts the next year. If I'm right about, when can we expect to know when they have something that looks like it might be going? October, March?
The federal fiscal year starts October 1. So this coming October 1 will be the beginning of FY, I have to pause and think about it, 2020. We may know we may know some parts of it because on the Senate side, the jurisdiction for the surface transportation authorization is split amongst a number of different committees. As you folks well know, each committee has a certain jurisdiction. Senate Environment and Public Works, which manages the highway title, federal highways, and a number of other related agencies. The chairman of that committee has indicated that they plan to mark up in the next month or so, potentially before August recess, possibly September. So that may be give an inkling as to what the format may look like. One element, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't touch upon it from a very significant policy perspective that has significant funding ramifications, is that the Highway Trust Fund, which funds all the highway programs, all the transit programs out of the transit account, is seeing declining revenues. So what's going in doesn't match with what is going out. And so there's been a continuing discussion and advocacy by a number to increase the revenues going into the Highway Trust Fund, which the vast majority of it was driven by the highway gas tax. So 18.3 cents on regular, 24.3 for diesel. So, thank you.
Other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, thanks. It's always great to see you guys come out here. Isn't it realistic, though? I mean, we have to work on this, on the FAST Act and all that. But there's a $1.5 trillion hole that was created by the tax reform bills, whatever you want to call it, which is now actually $2 trillion by current administration estimates. At $2 trillion over the next 8.5 years, spending limits just to cover that cost is going to be extraordinary. Realistically, zero is what we're going to have. I know when we've been out there, they're all talking about all the great things they're going to work on. And the first question they ask all of us, how much money do you have? Because we're going to count yours as part of our act, as though we're doing that. So it's, as as much as we want to get enthusiastic about it, I think we have to be realistic. We have to keep a seat at the table, but realistically, we got to find other sources. That is just mathematically cannot happen. That country doesn't even have the resources to pay the debt that we've created. So, you have any other perspective on that?
First off, yes. Second, I think those are fantastic points, Commissioner. One thing that they probably need to hear from are folks like yourself. And right now, the paradigm has been set up in the Highway Trust Fund since 1956 and variations thereof for the last 3 generations is this a user pay business model, so to speak, for the Highway Trust Fund. Trucks pay into it, cars pay into it, array of other, whomever uses the roads and the system pays into it, and we all benefit. Because it also is separate in a separate budget line item, there are insulating factors. But I think going to your point, that it was very spot on, over the last couple of few reauthorizations, the monies that go into the Highway Trust Fund are general fund. They're basically playing, I don't want to say budget gimmicks, but they're infusing general fund monies into the Highway Trust Fund. So without a doubt, there needs to be a better way to pay for the system, and that is what some folks are advocating. So I think it's absolutely spot on. I think it would be helpful for them to hear from more and more elected officials who really have the pulse of your constituents.
Thanks.
Any other comments, questions? You got off easy. But anyway, this is.
Thank you, Chair.
We really appreciate you coming out and just keep working with us because obviously we all can't go back to D.C., but you are our eyes and ears on the federal level. So, Lindsay, thank you for guiding them. Make sure they see everything in Contra Casa.
Just move to accept the report.
Move to
It's
accept.
an action. Yeah.
I have a first.
Second.
I have 2 seconds.
Kevin.
There we go, Kevin. We'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. We'll now move into 4A. 14, Draft 2019 Measure J Strategic Plan. Asham?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and board members. My name is Hisham Noemi. I'm the Director of Programming. I wanted to provide you with a quick overview of the Draft 2019 Measure J Strategic Plan. This is one of 2 beautiful documents you will see tonight. The other one is the TEP, which you will cover in the next meeting. We will seek your approval of the final version in September once we incorporate any comments you may have tonight on the draft. The 2019 strategic plan is the 6th update since the first one you adopted in 2007. As you know, we update it every 2 to 3 years, and we use it to determine how much and when to give Measure J funds to a specific project. And we take into consideration, of course, our cost in terms of debt service for issued bonds, as well as the latest estimate of our revenue sales tax projections. The highlights of the 2019 strategic plan are on page 4A, 14-4 of your packet. Just quickly, we started working on this update about 7 months ago. In December 2018, you provided us with direction on key issues that guided the development of this plan. The most important one is the revenue forecast. As you recalled, we hired HDL to put together the revenue forecast. You approved a lower forecast than the prior strategic plan in anticipation of a slowdown in the economy in the next 24 months. And basically, the forecast assumes no growth for the next 3 years. When you take into account our revenues for 2019, the near actuals, we will have about $136 million less over the life of Measure J than what we were projected in the last strategic plan. The challenge we had in this update is how to absorb this reduction in revenue without impacting ongoing projects while taking into consideration sub-regional equity, existing commitments, and the fact that there are not that many projects left in the strategic plan. We have over 2/3 of our projects completed or under construction. So we have limited choices where we can make funding cuts. To kick off the process, staff sent a letter to the RTPCs providing suggestions on where we can make funding cuts in each subregion, taking into consideration the status of the project, other funding available to the project, and the subregion priorities. And the draft plan reflects the input we got from the RTPCs over the past several months. And I'm pleased to say they agreed with what we suggested. The majority of the revenue reduction was absorbed by savings on completed projects like Highway 4 and the Caldecott Tunnel, and future reserves that have not yet been programmed to specific projects in the strategic plan. Only 3 ongoing projects in the strategic plan out of about 90 had funding reductions. These were Innovate 680, I-80 Central Phase 2, and Hercules Rail Station. The funding reductions are not expected to impact the pace of project development on these projects except for the Hercules Rail Station. And for that project, to mitigate the impact, WICTAC recommended that we advance the programming of $500K of their share of the TLC program to keep it going. As you know, issuing bonds against our future Measure J revenues have been instrumental in allowing us to leverage our funds to deliver projects early. The program of projects in Appendix A of the strategic plan reflects that. Almost 97% of our Measure J project funds are programmed by June 30th, 2025. That is 9 years ahead of when Measure J expires. By the end of the measure, we expect to spend a total of $754 million in Measure J funds, project funds, to build roughly $3.4 billion worth of projects. Since we maxed out our bonding capacity with the issuance of the 2018 bonds, this plan does not contemplate issuance of additional bonds. We may still, however, restructure or refinance our bonds to cut our debt service cost or reduce our risk. Looking ahead, with the reduction in our revenue and the advancement of several major projects in the next 2 years, like 684 Phase 3 and the southbound 680 HOV projects, we expect to experience a period of constrained cash flow on the project side in the year 2023 and 2024. Our finance team will be monitoring the cash flow situation carefully to ensure this does not become a problem. Fortunately, we have accumulated enough cash in some of our Measure J programs to help us get through that period. To increase our cash reserve, we're also recommending that you hold off the programming of the next cycle of the TLC and the pit bike program until we do the next update of the strategic plan in year 2022. Should this issue present itself, finance staff will be in front of you to make recommendations, additional recommendations as necessary. Some of them could be requiring sponsors to advance the project using their own funds and for later repayment by Measure J, or we could work out a fund exchange agreement with agencies like MTC, where we use their fund to complete our Measure J projects for later repayment. Or under worst case scenario, we have accounted for a short-term loan from a bank up to $7 million to help us through that period if necessary. Again, we are watching our cash flow carefully, and we will come up with other options if necessary if it becomes an issue. Given the circumstances where we had to deal with less revenues, nothing else really stood out in this strategic plan as potentially problematic. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any question.
Questions, comments? Okay, well, I'll entertain a motion.
You want to do public comment?
Oh, yeah, good comment. Public comments, is there anyone wishing to address us on this topic? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I'd move the motion and just want to thank Hisham for all the work. There's a lot of work to do it. It's actually a great report card. It does address the SB1 where we've gotten some funding. RM3 is in there. I would just say, and I know because you have a more serious tone of voice than I do, that we're in really great shape. It sounds as though if you were in the audience or listening at home, you might think that, wow, we're headed for an area. What we're doing is just being conservative in our estimating and knowing that we will be able to fund all of our planned programs, but the increases that we've seen in the past will be flat. So it's not like there's some dire thing. So we're a well-run agency, exceptionally well-run. I mean, to all of us who have our own other agencies, this is run a lot better than our own in many ways. So with that, I'd move the item just to say thanks.
And an enthusiastic second. It is a beautiful document.
Thank you very much.
I have a first and a second, and I guess we're all going to vote very enthusiastically. So, with that being said, we'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Unanimously. And thank you. 4B11, approval of, this one's going to be a tough one on you, Peter, but approval of the Contra Costa Electrical Vehicle Readiness Blueprint draft and submit and report to the California Energy Commission. I am impressed.
Good evening, Commissioners. Is this on?
You're on it.
We're going to charge forward with the first Contra Costa Electric Vehicle Readiness Blueprint. When Hisham said there was two great documents you were looking at tonight, he forgot to mention a really great document, and that's this blueprint. Philip Krajcek from the Cadmus Group is here to join me for the presentation tonight. Philip and his team did a great job addressing all the tasks that we presented him on the $200,000 grant that we got from the California Electric Commission to do this study. So we know time is of the essence. We're going to make the presentation brief, but hopefully electrifying. So can we confirm that that's on?
Yeah, it's
down
on.
there? Okay. So the schedule on this, we got the phase 1 grant. There is a phase 2 grant, and that's what's keeping our schedule tough here. We need to have this study into the CEC by the end of this month in order to be eligible for funding through phase 2. Even though the CEC is a little delayed in providing that program, they tell us it's on the way. But we will be prepared to submit applications for funding, hopefully some of the projects that are coming out of this blueprint. We brought Cadmus on board in October of 2018. We did significant stakeholder engagement and research from October through June of 2019, and we have the draft blueprint before you now to hopefully get your adoption of that tonight, and we will send that off to the CEC by the end of the month. So as you all are aware, CCTA, both you and staff, are innovation leaders in Contra Costa County, and the EV readiness blueprint fits right into that. We want to move forward with the adoption of electric vehicles and charging infrastructure within the county. We believe this is the first county-wide EV blueprint in the state. There have been some city-only blueprints, but we believe this is the first county-wide blueprint, so we're very excited about that. We have some opportunities here. Some things are going on with the Community College District, Gomanum Station out at Bishop Ranch, and Pittsburgh Unified School District, all using or experimenting with electric vehicles and renewable resources to even power those. I'll turn it over now to Philip, and Philip will keep us moving forward on the rest of the presentation.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Board of Commissioners. We're really honored to have had the opportunity to present this plan to you, given the amount of innovation that's gone on in the county so far. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the high-level findings and recommendations from our plan, and we'll entertain questions afterwards. So the first step of this blueprint exercise was to establish baseline conditions in the county. As you can see from the graph here, EV readiness is important because the market is starting to move and because we have a really long way to go if we want to achieve the levels of adoption that would support the state's climate action goals. It's important to note that Contra Costa ranked 7th in terms of county adoption of EVs per capita in the state as of 2018. The other element of the baseline is the amount of charging infrastructure available in the state, in the county. We compiled current data on it at workplaces and public locations where people charge when they conduct daily activities, as well as fast charging plazas. Across all these types, we found that about 15% of the projected need by 2025 is already established, is already in the ground. So there's a long way to go, but a lot of progress that's been made. That said, the amount of charging needed is a function of the amount of vehicles on the road, and the amount of vehicles could vary greatly, particularly if county agencies take aggressive action to implement projects that will align with California's climate action goals. So we modeled a plausible case aligned with the U.S. Energy Information Administration projections, as well as two more aspirational futures in which there's dramatic reductions in greenhouse gases. So here you can see the graphs visually of what this would look like. And the take-home message is that if we want to retire enough conventional vehicles by 2045 and aligned with the state, we have very little time before EV sales need to dramatically accelerate. So the philosophy of this blueprint document is that Contra Costa, CCTA can be a coordinating force. CCTA cannot do this alone, but there are a lot of opportunities to leverage programs and funding provided by third parties, as you see on the slide there. A couple examples of those opportunities include the Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Trust. I'm sure you've all heard of, quote, Dieselgate. That's a great opportunity, $5 million worth of money for charging infrastructure in California, and it covers no-cost charging for government-hosted facilities, and half of that is reserved for disadvantaged communities. Another important source to note is the California Energy Commission's implementation money that would be the phase 2 of this current study, which we'll be hopefully applying for soon. So next I'm going to talk about some of the major tasks we completed during this project. Our first task was to look at shared mobility hubs. Essentially, since it's important that EV policies also align with other solutions to transportation challenges in the county, one major task was the evaluation of the possibility of electrifying shared mobility hubs, locations that could be served as shared mobility hubs where mobility services like Uber Pool or Lyft Line or e-bikes and scooters could be used to reduce congestion and reduce single-occupant vehicle travel. We used PG&E data to determine grid capacity for hosting chargers at these locations, which we defined as park-and-ride locations, BART stations, and transit centers. And the take-home message, there's a lot of detail in the report, the take-home message is really that at most of these locations there's a modest amount of charging infrastructure that could be sited without substantial upgrades from PG&E. But for faster levels of charging and more substantial charging, there's a lot more study that needs to be done. The next major task was the workforce development planning that we did. We created a plan for preparing the Contra Costa automotive workforce to transition to a future where less total maintenance is required and where maintenance requires critical safety precautions in dealing with features like high voltage batteries and more advanced computer diagnostics. So it's very different from conventional auto technician training. We also created a plan to upskill electricians in the county and to excite the vocational students graduating from the programs about the electrical trades by exposing them to the significant amount of interesting work that can be done to electrify not only personal vehicles but also heavy-duty vehicles. Moderate investments in training could improve employment prospects for important target audiences, and the Workforce Development Board and the several educational institutions in the county have voiced eager enthusiasm for collaborating. The next major task was to compile best practice resources that provide guidance for municipalities, transit agencies, and other stakeholders in the county regarding topics ranging from site selection for charging, best practices for outreach and education, permitting and zoning policies, fleet electrification, and approaches to equitably bringing the benefits of EVs to all residents of the county. And the final major task was to identify priority locations for charging based on factors such as current access to charging, propensity to adopt EVs, and the importance of providing convenient charging for market segments where it's difficult to install home charging, such as for renters. The results of that mapping, we have a whole bunch of maps, so I'm just going to show you one here. We looked at the potential for daytime charging at public locations and workplaces, as well as residential charging, and created these priority areas and a scoring of various locations to look at. And as you can see, many of the disadvantaged communities were highlighted within the urban limit line. We also conducted the the analysis for the areas outside of the urban limit line to ensure that there's more probability that charging investment will benefit all parts of the county, including the rural areas. So with that, I'm going to jump into implementation strategies. We identified approximately 50 potential readiness strategies based on extensive stakeholder input, and based on recognized best practices, we selected a subset of 10 of them in the short term, 3 medium term, and 4 long term. These are representative of all the levers of control and influence available to CCTA and other county agencies, and they're intended to be used as a guiding framework. The steering committee provided extensive review of the drafted strategies and helped refine them for your review tonight. So these strategies, each of them includes recommendations for who would be the lead in the partner agencies. However, it's important to note that none of these agencies have been directed to take responsibility at the current time. Rather, this serves as a starting point for engaging in conversations about the collaboration that would be needed. Additionally, the blueprint's meant to be a living document that will adapt as technology and policy landscapes evolve. And so I'm going to move on to tell you about 3 of our strategies, some high priority short-term actions that could accelerate EV adoption. So the first of these, install infrastructure in priority areas, is particularly important given the data I presented earlier about the amount of charging available in the county. You can read about the actions included in this strategy starting on page 74 of the report. To note, we expect CCTA to be the lead, and we expect this to be a major partnership where working with MCE, the Air District, PG&E, and Electrify America, and many other partners. So it's important to see the metrics that we're looking at as the amount of funding that the county is able to secure, as well as the amount of charging that gets in the ground. The next strategy is coordinated outreach. And this is important because many external groups are working hard on messaging, and we don't want to recreate the wheel. But at the same time, a lot of effort is required to move the needle on outreach. It's very difficult to get people interested at the current time. So strategies 4 suggest some actions that can be taken, and we expect the lead would be 511 Contra Costa. The last strategy I want to talk to you about tonight is the promotion of EV reach codes. EV reach codes are a critical way of ensuring that new construction and major renovations make progress on EV infrastructure. It's most efficient to adopt these on the 3-year code cycle for the state. So this should be a high priority action this year, and we've already been educating the stakeholders on the importance of this through the process of the roadmap development. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. And as I said, this is just a sample of several immediately relevant and high-impact strategies based on our research. We encourage you to review the rest of the strategies, and we thank you for your support on this initiative.
I did want to quickly point out a few things. Philip mentioned quickly the living document part. So the mapping section and the toolbox section will be on our webpage and prominent in an area within our webpage so that the staff from all of the jurisdictions are able to access the mapping tools and use the layers and all that kind of stuff to see what priority areas might exist within your jurisdictions for potential infrastructure to be installed. And then the toolbox would be available for best practices for each jurisdiction to use as they're looking at permitting processes, development standards, ordinances, things like that related to EV adoption. I did want to quickly also thank Jody London, the Contra Costa County Sustainability Coordinator that played a large role in the whole study, but for the most part in the workforce development task in this. So thank you.
Peter, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Or from either or either. I didn't see in there, and maybe I'm remiss on this, the commercial aspect, like, Target is actually putting in charging stations as their customers are shopping, et cetera. And is there a certain section in there where you address big box or just businesses that are actually moving into these cities?
I think there's a couple ways that the blueprint addresses this. One is in a few of the strategies. We specifically reference ways to make it easier for those sorts of entities to install charging.
I guess what I'm interrupting, and I apologize. Well, I guess what I'm asking, are you going to actually have some type of list or some way to connect with these companies versus, i.e., Brentwood getting a hold of Target headquarters? I'm talking about how do we touch some of those people that are untouched?
I think as far as the blueprint's concerned, we would look for, as within the toolbox, in the best practices, some tools for jurisdictions to use as these developments come to them with some of these big box retailers, that there could be requirements or some way to have them address the need for EV charging within their facility.
Yeah, because I think what's happening, they are actually recognizing this is a good asset for their business, to be honest with you. We had 10 charging stations. Now there's a line just, for us. But I've been questioned on that. And so I think the city's got to make sure that's in the toolbox on how we really handle that. That's a suggestion on my part. Comments or questions? Oh, Kevin?
Yeah, Kevin has a question. There are varying levels of charging stations that vary drastically how long it takes to charge, from 30 minutes to 12 hours. Are we going to look for a standard out there as far as implementation? And if we create any type of mapping situation, or is someone going to be able to click on the map and say, if you park here, you can expect a 4-hour charge to bring your car to fully charge it or not? Because that's a definite concern as people are driving around with some level of expectation, and they pull into a station and don't want to sit there for 12 or 14 hours while their car charges. Are we going to be able to address those types of needs?
Yeah, so two things there. We did have some discussion about the mapping tool and who's it really designed for, and it's first and foremost designed for your staffs, the jurisdictions to use, and properly looking at what they need to do, land use, existing infrastructure, where the existing electric vehicles are in the county to make placements. I believe the layer that shows the existing infrastructure is from a different website called PlugShare, which actually has all that information. If you click on it, it shows you what kind of charger it is, so they would know how fast vehicles could charge. It'll even show if the charger is currently in use, or if it is broken down or something and needs to be repaired, and if calls, and it provides some crowdsourcing where people can make comments about that particular thing. So that is there as a user interface for people, but there's a lot of apps out there that people typically would use, and so we didn't necessarily design that for that. We designed it for your staff to be able to use. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. If I've noticed the ones in public places, no one's getting charged for charging. No one's paying a fee for charging.
That varies.
How long do we continue to subsidize EV drivers? I mean, it gets to a point where, we're going to be spending money for everybody to pull into our city council chambers or into our public lots and charge up their cars before they go home. Because they know they can do it for free, which, I mean, is there ever an anticipation of when we start charging or charging?
Yeah, I think
assigning fees or somehow collecting fees for the amount of energy.
I'll let Philip hit on that, because I'm sure he's seen some trends. I think charging is definitely a way that we can control the use of those charging stations as charging facilities versus parking spots. If there is a fee associated with charging there after, say, 2 hours, so that you can get, a 2-hour charge at either a lower price or free. Somebody's paying for it. It may be the building that that your work site's in. And then if that fee increases dramatically to discourage somebody from staying there when their car is already charged, it's time to move that car so somebody else can use the charging facility. So those will all be part of the best practices toolbox, and jurisdictions can decide which tools, which policies they want to have with regard to, having fees associated with charging, so that they can control the use of those charging facilities and rotate more vehicles through to use that facility.
The only thing I would add is you're absolutely right that over time policy will evolve to early on in the process of spurring a market transformation. You would expect to want to use as many levers as you can, and over time, as more and more adoption increases, you would expect that more places would charge on a user pays sort of basis to represent the costs incurred. And I'd also note that there's plenty of resources we can point you to that we reviewed and curated for this study to provide best practices.
We all have to remember, nothing's free.
Yeah.
I just want to piggyback on to Kevin. Dave and I sit on the Air Resources Board. And one of the things we're looking at is that outreach that you were talking about, to tell people that you don't have to charge your car up to full capacity, as opposed to when we go to the gas station and you fill up with all the gas. Part of it is to teach people, in addition to the policies and paying, you only need to charge for 20 minutes. It'll get you half a battery life worth to get you where you next need to go, as opposed to sitting there all day and charging. We'll see how that works, but it's one of the ways that we're trying to address that issue.
And to all husbands out there, you definitely don't want your wife charging 12 hours at a Kohl's. So.
Better than the needless markup. I mean, even Marcus. It would seem that the real purpose of this, these are details in the toolbox, but the high-level view is, how do we get this county to be able to put in the infrastructure to meet the 2045 goals of getting rid of internal combustion engines and greenhouse gas reduction? Given that, it would seem that the one section, maybe I don't read it that way, I think it would be important to note for the 19 cities in the county, what ordinances are in places to require these to be built, right? Because much of it is still voluntary. But what are those plans to be able to show, again, best practices? What is the number of stations we know, for example, on accessibility ADA parking places? There's a formula, it's right in the code. What are each city's doing? Because I think we ought to compare that and have those accessible through this porthole, if this is on a web base, to highlight that. Because I think what would be great is that as a county, if we're going to be leaders, that we should all have the same standard. So whether you're building a brand store in Concord or in Brentwood or Danville, it should have all those same standards and make it a level playing field. But we need that mathematically to be able to know of what development potential there is. You can then calculate how much of that infrastructure would be required to be placed in there. And mathematically, you can say, by doing this, by 2045, we'll achieve all of these things. I didn't see that. I think that would be good. And I think then for us as the agency, what policies are recommended that we should modify, instead of just having reports saying, here's how you get there, sort of, here's this, that what policies should we change to make sure that as we develop every project, we are going to adhere to the standard. And then that would be a role model for the other 19, 20 entities. Again, looking at almost, we're doing our own ordinance to say all of our projects where we have parking and things, we will meet this standard ratio. It would seem we would do that. The other thing, and this is really a small thing, that was the important part I wanted to say. I'm not used to seeing reports that have our consultant's name on every page. It's at the foot. It's on the footer. If this is going to be a public document, we paid for this. We appreciate the work. You're usually credited on the cover and on the inside for doing it. It might be good that it has our logo on there. This is our report. We're paying for it. Yes, we're getting funding. Just if we're going to put it out there, because if you look at the previous report, there's a consultant that helped us do that. As all of our reports, it might just be good that our logo, like what you see right there, is on there. So just a small thing. But the other things, getting all of our ordinances and those, and creating, what is that standard? Of if whoever, I don't know who has the best ordinance to help us achieve this 2045 goal, but it'd be good to know which one so that the rest of us could start to look at that and say, that's the one we ought to be trying to emulate. But otherwise, I think this is a great idea. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
You're going to respond?
Yes, if you'd like to sort of discuss the idea of where those standards fall within the strategies. I'd say there's 4 different strategies that touch upon what you're referencing in different capacities. One is establishing CCTA as the entity that tracks progress and establishes what the needs are and provides suggestions about how much infrastructure would need to be provided in locations. Another is that CCTA has the ability to modify its growth management program checklist to encourage adoption of advanced EV policies. Another area is sort of in standardizing permitting processes in accordance with AB 1236, and as well as standardizing or promoting more advanced zoning practices where you may provide bonus parking for having some of that be EV enabled. And then obviously the REACH codes element is a place where we want to see the more and more of the county's jurisdictions aligning on ratios of the amount of charging that needs to be provided in new construction.
I think those are great ideas. I think I don't know if we have time or maybe it's a supplemental thing, is to be able to find out who has ordinances in places and list them, because it kind of puts all of us on notice.
Yep.
Maybe I don't even have one. They do. But I think that's good, because our goal is to get to 2045. Of course, if you look at the 200 housing bills that are out there right now, over half of them are trying to eliminate all parking. So this is all going to be for naught. So we're not going to be allowed to build parking, so we can't put EV stations in because you can't do parking. There's a conflict.
You're expanding the topic there, sir. No. Mr. Hudson.
I think the point Noel's making may actually be understating it. The problem is not being identified to people. We have 2.5% electric vehicles, small trucks and cars today, and the state believes they're going to be at 90% by 2040. So when you really look at this thing, what do you think the 20s are going to look like? And we're all thinking small trucks and cars. I think that the vehicles that we're talking about that nobody's even discussing are the electric bikes and some of these scooters that are coming down the pike. Everything's electric. So I like the idea of CCTA really taking a look at it, because we get to see all these things in different places. I know we should at least be adopting something for docking for the bikes. And frankly, if we don't build our parking structure, our parking locations in the 2030s, half the parking lot's going to have to be electric charge minimum. So how are you going to get there? Every time I bring this up at mayor's conference, they look at me like, if you shut up, we can get to dinner. But the reality here is this is a very, very major problem that nobody's addressing until now. The infrastructure, nobody's looking at.
Julie.
Well, a suggestion was made right here in one of the options that we have, and we're looking at an expenditure plan in our next meeting. Maybe part of our checklist is preparing and putting in place model ordinances and requirements that going forward we start implementing new policies for electric charging stations. And we would probably have to be the agency to develop that, looking at all the other things we can find, but putting together a model ordinance for all of our jurisdictions, and maybe that becomes part of the next checklist. Just a thought for us to think about in our next meeting.
Is there anyone from the public wishing to address us? Seeing no one, I will entertain a motion. You got first, you have a second. We'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Unanimous.
Mr. Chair, can I make a procedural request for your consideration? The next item has been through all the RTPCs. It's been
Second.
through planning. We need to take public comment, but I'm hoping that we can have a very abbreviated staff meeting. We've got a huge agenda
Yes, ma'am.
ahead of us.
I already have a first with
Yeah.
you, and I have a second.
Well, you need
And
to.
I will ask for public comments.
And that's on CMP.
Any, no public comments on this issue? We'll call for the vote. All in
Aye.
favor? Aye. Opposed? Unanimous. What about the next one?
4B14, I move staff recommendation.
I have a first, I have a second. Is give me time. Public comments, is there anyone wishing to discuss this? Public? Seeing no one, we'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Associated committee reports, communications, Central County, East County, Southwest County, West County, nothing. Chairs, comments, reports, nothing. Commissioners, anything? You have your light on, Mr. Hudson?
No,
Okay. Executive staff?
Thank you very much for clearing up some time for me so I can have a long report.
You should take that to heart too, Mr. Iwasaki.
All I'm going to report on tonight is something very special. The Contra Costa Transportation Authority received the Silver Medal Award for Good Government by the Contra Costa Taxpayers Association. So I thought that was pretty cool. I got to go and accept that, and they really like the way that you all oversee us and we run this organization. So congratulations to all of us. And that concludes my report.
Very good. Okay. We are now, if anybody will adjourn to the next meeting on September 18th, 6 o'clock. Now, do we move right on into the next meeting? Okay. We're now going